The laughter was barely concealed, not loud enough to make headlines, not obvious enough to clip and circulate, but unmistakable if you were watching closely. World leaders shifting in their seats, translators glancing up, then back down. The kind of quiet dismissal that lands harder than booze. At that moment, it became clear that something fundamental had changed. Not just about Donald Trump, but about the United States itself. The world was no longer reacting to him. It was moving past him. For years, Trump and his inner circle clung to a theory of power that sounded ruthless and sophisticated, but was, in practice, deeply unserious. The idea was that unpredictability is strength, that chaos is leverage, that if allies never know what you'll do next, they'll fall in line out of fear. Tariffs as punishment, threats as diplomacy, insults as strategy. This worldview treated international relations like a reality show where intimidation substitutes for credibility. But what we're witnessing now is the collapse of that theory in real time. At Davos, the global economic stage where reputations are tested and narratives are forged, Trump spoke as if he were still the center of gravity. He wasn't. The room didn't lean in. The markets didn't wait. The alliances didn't pause. The world didn't flinch. It adjusted. And adjustment, not rebellion, is the most dangerous response any superpower can provoke. While Trump escalated tariff threats, while he floated territorial demands involving Greenland, while he confused basic geography and treated sovereign nations like properties in a hostile takeover, something quieter but far more consequential was happening. America's allies were building workarounds, not dramatic exits, not public divorces, just careful, methodical diversification away from Washington as a reliable partner. This is not how empires fall in movies. There is no single explosion. There is erosion. Take Europe. While Trump was threatening tariffs on European goods, framing trade as punishment and leverage, the European Union was finalizing one of the largest free trade agreements on the planet. A deal with the Mercosur bloc of South America, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, over 700 million people combined. A massive trade zone, deliberately structured to reduce dependency on any single unpredictable partner. What's striking is how European leaders framed it. Not as a growth initiative, not as an efficiency play, but as a political choice. A choice against tariffs, against isolation, against power politics. That language matters. It's a diplomatic way of saying, we are building an alternative to dealing with Washington under Trump, and that should terrify Americans. Because this isn't about hurt feelings or bruised egos. This is about structural exclusion, when supply chains reroute, when investment flows adapt, when long-term contracts lock in partnerships that outlast election cycles. Those decisions don't snap back overnight, even when the chaos agent leaves the stage. Trump's defenders like to pretend this is strength. They call it standing up to the world, but the world is not standing still. It is reorganizing, and it's doing so in ways that deliberately minimize exposure to American volatility. Look north, Canada, America's closest ally by geography, culture, trade, and history. Canada didn't cut a major deal with China quietly or reluctantly. It did it publicly, deliberately, and its prime minister said the unthinkable out loud, that Canada's relationship with China is currently more predictable than its relationship with the United States under Trump. That statement should have stopped Washington cold. Canada does not trust Beijing. This is not ideological alignment. It is risk management. Tariffs one day, threats the next. Agreements announced, then reversed. Policy contingent on mood swings, cable news segments, and perceived slights. That is not leadership. That is volatility. And allies do not anchor their futures to volatility. So Canada diversified. Just like Europe. Just like others quietly doing the same. This isn't defiance. It's adaptation. And adaptation is fatal to coercive power. Trump's response, predictably, was escalation. More threats, more tariffs, more theatrical outrage. He floated the idea of economically punishing Denmark and other European countries unless the United States could acquire Greenland. Read that sentence carefully. Economic punishment to force territorial concessions from a NATO ally. That is not tough negotiation. That is a breach of post-war norms so severe it borders on absurdity. The response from Europe was swift and unified. France, Germany, Sweden, Britain, clear rejection, not outrage, not panic, calm refusal. They would not be blackmailed. they would respond collectively. Trump had crossed a line, and this is where the story gets even more dangerous for him. Even his ideological allies began to flinch. Right-wing voices in Europe distanced themselves. Republicans in Congress started muttering warnings. Conservative commentators who have defended Trump through everything quietly admitted this was too much, that Europe still matters, that this path leads somewhere dark. Markets noticed too. Violent swings, hundreds of points wiped out in a day. Trade deals paused, investment decisions delayed, NATO cohesion questioned openly. None of this happens in a vacuum. Markets are not emotional, they are predictive, and what they were pricing in was instability. This is what isolation looks like in real life. Not sanctions, not speeches, but planning. Allies planning for a future where the United States might not be a dependable anchor, where American leadership is conditional, where American commitments are temporary. And here is the core truth Trump cannot grasp. Strong leaders shape systems around themselves. Weak leaders force systems to root around them. That is what is happening now. The European Union is not waiting for Trump to leave office. It is not betting on American voters to correct course. It is hedging against the possibility that Trumpism is not an anomaly, but a recurring risk. That American unpredictability could return again and again. Once allies reach that conclusion, the damage is permanent. There is a dangerous myth inside the MAGA ecosystem that Europe doesn't matter, that it's decadent, lazy, weak, that Americans don't need them. This caricature is not just insulting, it is strategically suicidal. The United States is deeply interdependent with its allies, economically, militarily, technologically, culturally. Global power is not exercised alone anymore. It is networked. When those networks quietly reroute, influence evaporates. And the most alarming part is how quiet this all is. No grand announcements, no dramatic speeches, just signatures on paper, new supply chains, new trade corridors, new habits. Once alternatives exist, dependence fades. And once dependence fades, leverage disappears. This is the cost of unpredictability. This is the price of confusing intimidation with strength. Even if Trump were to disappear from the political stage tomorrow, many of these changes would remain. Trade agreements don't vanish because personalities change. Infrastructure investments don't reverse because tone improves. Trust, once broken repeatedly, does not regenerate on command. That is the tragedy here. The damage is not hypothetical. It is already embedded. And here's where the legal and constitutional implications deepen. Foreign policy is not just theater. It is power exercised under constitutional constraints. Congress has authority over trade, over tariffs, over declarations of war, over alliances. Trump's unilateralism has repeatedly tested those boundaries. His use of tariffs as personal punishment tools, his threats against allies, his transactional framing of security commitments. This erodes the rule-based order the United States helped build after World War II, an order that benefited America enormously. Stability, predictability, trust. Trump treats those as weaknesses. In reality, they were the scaffolding of American dominance. Remove the scaffolding and the structure wobbles. The authoritarian playbook is visible here. Create chaos, undermine institutions, personalize power, demand loyalty, frame resistance as betrayal. But that playbook works domestically only if institutions fail completely. Internationally, it fails faster because other countries have options, and they are exercising them. This is why the laughter at Davos mattered. It wasn't mockery. It was recognition. Recognition that Trump no longer commands the room, that he is noise, not signal, that the future is being negotiated elsewhere. At the climax of this story is a simple, devastating realization. America is not being isolated by enemies. It is isolating itself through leadership that confuses dominance with durability. Power is not the ability to scare people today. Power is the ability to shape their decisions tomorrow. Right now, tomorrow is being planned without Washington at the center. And that should alarm anyone who understands what is at stake. This is not about partisan politics. This is about national capacity, about whether the United States remains a system setter or becomes a system taker, about whether allies see America as an anchor or a risk factor. History is unkind to nations that mistake fear for respect. The question now is not whether Trump notices this erosion. It's whether anyone can stop it before the rerouting becomes irreversible. Because once the world learns it can function without you, it rarely chooses to come back. This isn't the last chapter. When the next move happens, you'll want to understand what you're seeing. Subscribe so you're not caught off guard when it matters most.